Great, we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette. I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today I'm speaking with Derek Scruggs in Colorado. And Derek, you're the VP, Vice President for Staunch Robots, which the name got my attention immediately because I'm a big fan of robots and telepresence. So, and we're going to get into all of that, but first I want to know, tell us about you and what does your Anywhere office look like? We'll start with that question and then dive into the harder stuff.
Well, you saw my dog just run by, so she sometimes comes with me. My Anywhere office is pretty simple. I have a MacBook Air, and pretty much all of what I do is online, whether it's writing code or managing projects. I write blog posts. I do podcast interviews as well. Pretty much all of that can be captured on my laptop. I do have, what I'm speaking to you now is I have an iMac, but I'm going to get rid of it. I don't really need it. Just with my MacBook Air and a large monitor, it's really the same thing. So this year is a big theme for me this year is streamlining, getting rid of clutter, getting rid of stuff I don't need, and I do that every few years. I'm pretty good about not letting it stack up, but I do have a stack of things I'm getting rid of, and one of them is going to be the iMac.
I'm a big fan of the streamlining process myself. When I moved to Europe, I had one suitcase, and that was it. And for some reason, it was so liberating that I really remembered it ever since.
Yeah, I fantasize about that. I have a friend, you maybe know of, Andrew Hyde. He spent 2 years basically wandering the globe, and he was down to he had a total of, I want to say, 18 things. He had given away everything he had, and he was actually even featured in the New York Times. He had like one pair of socks, one pair of shoes, a pair of sandals, his laptop, his iPod, and like 2 shirts, shorts, and pants. That was it.
Yeah, it's surprisingly freeing when you don't have all that stuff, I've noticed. Yeah. So, in terms of, is this working remotely with Staunch Robots? I get the impression that it's kind of new, not brand new, but sort of new. Can you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah, I've never really done it before. I've done tech startups for a long time, 20 plus years I've been doing them. And in that context, we've sometimes had remote people, but most of the time we've all been in the same place. And so when I started talking to Staunch Robots, I was not sure about it. I was like, I don't know. I kind of like having people in the same room. But after I worked with them on a project, and I was pleasantly surprised at how well we were able to do things remotely. There's definitely, I think it requires a little more planning. You have to kind of think a little more strategically about how you're going to run the project. But the tool and the blog post you mentioned, we talk about that, the different tools we use and kind of the purpose of those tools. But if you do make that effort, it's actually good because software development, it can get, especially in a startup context, it can get very loosey-goosey. And that may work for the first year or so, but if you're trying to scale to any level, you need to start having process. And so by kind of thinking through that up front, it actually, I think, makes the development process go more smoothly and really get a sense of what it is you're working on, what you're going to accomplish, where the roadblocks are, and so on.
So being remote basically forces you to plan more because you are remote. And if you were to say, what has been the most challenging thing for you about going remotely? What's really something that's hard to make work?
It's hard. You have to really be conscious of culture, company culture, doing it virtually because there's no real water cooler to stand around and chat. So we use chat tools to help with that. But it's still something that we do. We have daily chats, but we do a meeting every other week online where we just get online and talk about what's going on. But I would say that's the trickiest thing, and I can't say there's a magic bullet for that. It's just something you have to be conscious about. I think on a personal level, it's really easy to screw around. Honestly, to not be in work mode. For me, it really helps to have a regimented schedule in terms of when I get up, when I'm at work, when I'm not at work. I get dressed. I don't just sort of sit around in my pajamas all day. I take a shower first thing in the morning. I have a separate place where I work, and that helps me a lot, I think.
I've heard this before, people recommending the schedule and to have a real office space. And even for me, I noticed that I just have a one-bedroom apartment, so everything's in one room. And then I got the room divider. And that was, in one sense, to hide the bed that's behind me, so that it has a more professional look, of course, because if you're working with clients, you just don't want the bed in the scene. There's something professional about it. But then also, when I put up the screen in the morning, it gives me a little divider in the room of like, this is now office mode. And when I see myself in meetings, I see myself in the office. I think it does make a difference. It's surprising having a separate space, how much difference that makes.
Yeah, and I do like when I'm at home, I'm usually working on my iMac. When I go to a coffee shop, I take my MacBook. But even at home, the MacBook, I rarely have it in this office. Like, it's my fun computer when I'm at home. So I'll have it downstairs on the couch or in my bedroom, and you just sort of keep those, as much as possible, keep those activities separate.
So you even have two separate things, not even just a separate office, but also separate equipment, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't really planned, but it does sort of work that way. And they blend together because, as I said, if I go to a coffee shop and work, I am using the MacBook for there. But generally, when I'm home, that's just kind of my fun computer.
So would you go back to a co-located situation, given the choice, or?
Maybe. It depends on the context. I mean, I would say that I haven't truly taken advantage of the sort of the upside of virtual as much as I would like. And that's actually one of my goals this year, is to do more of that. So Staunch Robots is actually based in South America. I'm the only, well, there's two of us in North America, but I'm the only one who does kind of development and project management in North America. All of our clients are in North America. But I did go back in October, late September, October. I spent about 5 weeks in Colombia. And in that case, I wasn't virtual. We do have an office there, so I would go into the office every day. But with all my clients, I was remote. And I really enjoyed it. I loved the experience of living in a foreign country, not just visiting, but living there. I really enjoyed. And so one of my goals this year is to do a little more of that. Not just necessarily in foreign countries, but I would like to, I mentioned earlier, I'd like to try living in some warmer locales. So at some point this year, I plan to go spend some time in Southern California. Thinking I might try Miami for a while. I'm thinking Charleston, South Carolina, a few different places. And that'll be when I really take advantage of the freedom that remote gives you.
Right. I have a term for that. I've made up my own name for that, and I call it a work holiday. So You're not going somewhere on holiday. You're actually going somewhere to experience a new place, but you're also working. So you can work during the day and hang out in cafes or whatever at night, or explore. So.
Yeah, it really helps me to have something to anchor me a little bit, like something I have to do every day. I actually like that.
The routine.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about Staunch Robots, and now I'm curious, how does the team operate? And then we're going to dive into tools, because I saw on your website you guys use lots of tools. I'm really curious about that.
So Staunch Robots was started by a guy named Todd Morrill. He's the founder and CEO. He's also an American. He actually went to school here in Boulder. He went to CU Boulder, the university here, and studied computer science, but he never made it as a career programmer. I should say he never tried to. He decided he likes technology, but didn't really want to be a programmer, and he spent most of his 20s basically wandering around Southeast Asia, working on himself, doing things like 10-day meditation retreats and things like that. But then he eventually did get into the business world, and he had somehow ended up in Argentina with a friend of his, and they ran a similar kind of company there. And then a few years later, Todd broke off on his own. He'd moved to Colombia by that point. And there's a mega trend that's been going on for the last, let's say, 15 years, which is the possibility of outsourcing, offshore type work. There was a lot of hype early on, and a lot of that was done in India and Eastern Europe, and it's like Gartner calls it the hype cycle, and this happens with any technology. There's like all this excitement about how great it's going to be, but then it doesn't really live up to expectations, and then there's sort of this trough of disillusionment, but then it starts to catch on again. And I think that's where we are with offshoring over the last, let's say, 4 years. We're on the uptick part. There was a lot of disappointment early on. And some of the challenges, if you are using folks in India or Eastern Europe, is just time zone. It's harder to coordinate schedules. And so I've often thought, I remember years ago thinking, wow, if South America can sort of penetrate this market, they have a real advantage there.
Right.
And lo and behold, I discovered there was a company doing it, Staunch Robots. I started talking to them about a little bit about this time last year, but seriously last summer. And they do have developers in Asia and Eastern Europe, but most of the developers are in South America. And so that solves a lot of the time zone challenges you see. And the tools have caught up. You mentioned tools, we'll get into that, but the tools have sort of caught up with the possibilities, and so there's just a lot more, there's a lot more of an infrastructure, I guess you could say.
It seems like in the last 5 years, tools have really come a long way. And now the offshoring and also internet has come a long way. Bandwidth in general, it keeps increasing exponentially all over the world in terms of availability and quality. So yeah, you're right, given the time zone, I didn't even think of that, like how much of an advantage that actually is. Yeah, it seems like an easy thing, but I have to say it comes up in every single interview as an issue. And even in my own work, it's totally an issue. Twice a year when the time zone changes, Europe changes 2 weeks after the U.S., and that even just that 1 hour change can mess you up for the entire time.
Well, the funny thing too is South America. I'm pretty sure there's no country in South America that even has daylight savings. So Colombia, in Medellin, where the company's based, right now it syncs up to Eastern Standard Time, or is it Standard or Daylight we're on? I never know. But right now it matches up with the East Coast. But come March or April, when we change the clocks again, it'll match up with Central Time. So that's something our developers have to be aware of. That's part of my job, is to warn them when stuff like that happens. But fortunately, that's not a bad thing, Medellin matching East Coast time. Sao Paulo, I think, is maybe 1 or 2 hours even ahead of the East Coast, and that's about as far east as our developers go. So they like that, right? They don't have to get up at 8 a.m. to work with an East Coast client. They can actually sleep in a little bit.
Right. There's an advantage there, and 1 to 2 hours difference, that's totally manageable. Once you get that down, that's totally manageable. So, are there any cultural issues that have come up that have been difficult to deal with?
I would say a little bit. Most of the developers we work with have very good English skills, but sometimes they don't, and so that can be a challenge, and that's kind of part of my job, is to sometimes translate what the client wants. And when I say translate, it's not that I speak fluent Spanish. I speak some Spanish, and I'm working on it, or I don't speak any Portuguese. But it's more just like, this is true in any tech business. Sometimes the client says they want something, but they can't really translate that into what that means technically.
Right.
So sometimes my job is to do that anyway, and it's just a little bit harder with for people whose English isn't at the native level. I would say that South America is definitely, in my experience, which is limited, I should say. I've basically only spent time in Medellin. It's a little bit more of a laid-back culture there. It's not the type A New York hustle that some people might prefer. And so that doesn't mean you can just start cracking the whip, right? You have to translate what we need into their world, and it's an ongoing. I don't want to call it a challenge, but it's something we have to be mindful of.
Right, it simply comes up. I mean, it simply is. I mean, I know living in Europe, there's a difference in every country that you go to. Even Germany's only 10 kilometers away from me, and as soon as you cross the border, there's a clear difference, and it's hard to even articulate what exactly the difference is, but it is there, and everybody feels it. So I ask because I don't understand. I mean, I've been really trying to understand the cultural issues and what they are for people.
Yeah.
People just say it's actually just awareness of the culture and just knowing how people operate. But in general, everybody's a human and we're the same. You know, different holidays, maybe different customs, of course. But
yeah, it's funny too. I think it's honestly just a function of climate. You know, like Medellin. It's a perfect place. It's never too hot, never too cold there, year round. You know, the only bad thing you could say about it is it gets a fair amount of rain, but not as much as somewhere like Seattle. And the upside of that is it's really green and it's mountainous. I mean, it's a beautiful place. And I think if I grew up there, I would think the world is just this beautiful place where wonderful things come to me, you know? Whereas if I grew up near the Arctic Circle, I would think the world is a very harsh place where you better have all your ducks in a row and be organized and efficient, you know, or you'll freeze to death. So it makes sense if you look at it from that perspective.
Right. You can be a little more laid back. I'm sure when you go to San Diego, even if you spend time in Southern California, you'll notice that there's also a more laid back culture there.
Oh, for sure.
Definitely, you're right. There's a link with weather. I mean, there has to be. So I want to talk about tools now. I've been dying to get into it. Because on your website, I mean, the first thing actually I was going through and I was writing down some of the notes and notes from who you are and the website. And I wrote down lots of tools, and then I continued to read, and in your blog article you mentioned we use lots of tools. I thought, okay, so it's a thing with you guys. So why do you use so many tools?
Well, it's partly the evolution of software development itself over the past, basically since about 2000. The term of art you hear a lot is Agile, Agile. Agile programming, Agile development, Agile business, you know, those are all terms you'll hear thrown around. And I won't go into a deep explanation of it, but basically it comes to, it's a more organic way of building software compared to the past. The past used to be, you'd have these big, long, thick documents of specifications, and you had to develop those. And to some degree, there's still an element of that. Specifications can be useful. But it's really about breaking down what it is you're trying to build into the smallest units possible and building as much as you can as quickly as you can in what they call a sprint, which can be 1 week or 2 weeks, and then looking at that and saying, is this going in the right direction? Does this work the way we need it to work? You know, maybe we should change this one concept because it doesn't work from a user perspective, or it turns out we didn't really need that after all. And so that's kind of the macro environment. And then there's a lot of tools that have popped up over the years to do that, whether they're electronic or some of them, you know, a lot of people just like to use whiteboards in a very kind of structured way. So there's tons of tools that popped up, and when you add into that kind of the remote environment, there's both tools for managing the project and there's tools for knowing what's going on in the project at any given moment. And so that's a lot of what I talk about in that post you reference, is what tool do you use at what stage? For example, before a project starts, if we're still just pitching it, you know, and estimating for the client, we haven't actually signed them up as a client, it's better to use something ad hoc like Google Docs and spreadsheets. We use Basecamp for some of the basic organizing stuff. But then once they become a client, we use something that's more structured, like Pivotal Tracker or Trello. There's lots of different tools like that. And the ones I write about in that post are basically ones that I inherited. You know, I can't say they're best of breed, and I'm careful to say that in the post because there are a lot of really good ones, and oftentimes it turns on your specific needs, what the best tool is. So yeah, I mentioned Pivotal. We also, for software development, one of the big things that's arisen in the last several years is test-driven development, so that when you write new code, you also write a test to make sure it works, because a really common problem with software is you add a new feature and suddenly it breaks something that you wrote 6 months ago. And so there's a lot of tools to help automate that process as well, and notify you when something's not working. That is a godsend. That is a godsend. I mean, having those kinds of things just in the last few years has made life so much easier for developers.
And do you find that you're constantly experimenting with new tools, or is the set that you have, it's pretty much you guys try to work within this set?
I don't experiment a whole lot. I have a couple of go-to tools that I use. Sometimes it's driven by the client, though. You know, they may have their own tool set they want to use, and so in that case, we'll go along with whatever it is they want. But I'm pretty happy with what I have, and I haven't seen a real need to use something else.
Yeah, I ask because I hear some teams, they allow all of the developers or all of the people on the team, they kind of choose their own, and so the tools sort of expand and contract, you know, the tool base based on what it is. So I just was curious how Staunch Robots did it. But it sounds like you have a set of tools that works really well. No need to.
For the most part, yeah, it's really seductive. I mean, this is true with even, like, I got into kind of just personal years ago, and it's really easy just to chase the new shiny object. You know, ooh, this new thing, right? And if it does have a feature you really need, then you probably should use it. But most of the time, there's not a lot of changing circumstances from project to project. There's basic needs. You need to capture the requirements. You need to track whether it's getting done. You need to be able to communicate throughout the day. And you need to be notified when sort of system-level events happen. And, you know, the tools that we use, I feel like, are pretty solid for those purposes.
What do you guys use for a communication tool for the team? Do you I don't think I caught it. Is there a centralized chat system? Is there a HipChat I think you use?
Right, we use HipChat a lot for just team communication. It's got some nice features. I actually personally prefer something called FlowDoc, which I did a separate blog post about that. But it's not either or. You can use both. FlowDoc can serve as a chat tool, but we don't use it for that purpose. But most of our chat is done through HipChat. Although occasionally my partner Tom will ping me through Skype, just because that's what he happens to be working in.
Right. I think Skype's pretty common, so.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I assume there's lots of informal communication that also happens on HipChat, not just the back and forth.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff. You know, we actually have a little robot, a bot that you can send commands to in HipChat, and it'll, like, you can say, image, oh my God, and it'll search Google for the first image that comes up that's relevant to oh my God, and it'll put that in HipChat. And so just silly games back and forth, just, you know, kind of like the office water cooler.
Right. Right. Well, let's see.
One of my favorite ones is excuse. If you just type in !excuse, it comes back with a very technical sounding excuse for why the system broke.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So you know, the website's down. Excuse, it turns out the database wasn't proper. You know, it just a library of like 50 excuses you can use.
Brilliant. I should have. That's brilliant. I would love that.
Yeah.
So now you mentioned something that caught my attention, and you said, so I'm familiar with Agile and the Agile development world, but you mentioned Agile project management, and it sounds like you've been in the startup, managing startups for the last 20 years, or in that world. I'm really curious, what is the difference for you in managing a remote team and managing a co-located team? Also, and maybe what it means to manage in an Agile way, if there's anything to highlight there.
Yeah, you know, I mean, most of my work has been on the software side, but If it comes to like managing, let's say, a marketing campaign, I'm going to be honest and say we don't have a real good system for that. I know there are people who do, and I don't think it's necessarily. It's sort of the nature of our business. We're very small, so we don't. And our, a campaign for us is a little thing. It's not a television campaign or
right.
A huge project where we're going to be advertising on lots of websites or anything like that. And so it's much more organic. It's here's an idea we're working on, and we'll usually use just Google Docs and screen share things to do that. So I can't say I have any real great insight in how to apply that to non-business functions.
Okay.
Sorry, non-tech functions.
Okay. Yeah, no, fair enough. I was just really curious because there's this big debate in Agile. I don't know, maybe it's not a big debate anymore, but it seems to me there's a debate whether Agile and distributed can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think, well, it has to. I mean, there's so many situations in where we can't all be in the same room. So then what? And I don't even like the argument of should we or should we not do it. To me, it's like we have to do it in certain circumstances. So if we have to do it, then how do we make it work? And that's really more what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard this debate about distributed and Agile? And I mean, clearly making it work.
Not really. I'm just trying to think if I mean, there's definitely a broader argument whether distributed works at all. I mean, we saw with Yahoo, Marissa Mayer started requiring everyone to come to the office. And I think I think there is room for debate with that. I mean, I think it depends on the type of company you are and the type of projects you're working on. There are certain things where it's probably better to have everyone at the office. But in terms of just pure software development, and maybe within that, there's certain types of things that you don't want distributed. I mean, I imagine if you work for the NSA, they don't want stuff going over the network that's not 100% encrypted and secure and all that, and so it's a security risk for them. Maybe there's similar types of environments to that where it makes sense to have everyone in the same place. But I think for most of the run-of-the-mill development, building websites, building web apps, building mobile apps, I think you can get away just fine with distributed.
And what about in the startup culture, actually? It just got me thinking. I mean, in the startup world, it feels to me that things move quickly and fast. You don't have a lot of time. There's not a lot of money usually. You get your idea to market as quickly as possible, and thus being co-located, you're like in the flow, pinging ideas off people all the time. So if you're a startup, are you at a disadvantage if you're remote, do you think?
I'm not really sure about that. I don't know if you are or not. I think it really comes down to the personality of the team and whether they have worked remotely before. I mean, startups, most of them fail anyway, right? It's just, most of them are going to fail, period. And I'm not sure that you can put your finger on, well, if we weren't remote, we wouldn't have failed, or if we were remote, we would have succeeded. So, some of our clients are startups, and it's worked out just fine. But then again, we are not. We're the order takers. We're not the decision makers when it comes to what's the strategy of this company and what should this website look like. We typically are not. Sometimes we are, but usually we're not making those kind of decisions. Yeah. And so I think if you're making those kind of decisions, it might make more sense to have everyone in the same place. But for the implementation, oftentimes it can be just a big distraction. If you're in a big open office and you're trying to work on building this new feature and everyone's tapping you on the shoulder to ask your opinion every 15 minutes about something, I mean, there's a lot of companies that argue very strenuously that that's a terrible way to do it. The 37 Signals guys, WordPress, Matt Mullenweg, he's a huge believer in distributed and would have it no other way. So there's arguments to be made for both sides. And as I say, I think it comes down to, do the principals who are running this company, are they already comfortable with distributed? If they are, then there's probably a good chance it'll work.
Right. And that gets me thinking on another question, which is personality. Have you guys hired people at Staunch Robots where it just didn't work, the remoteness of it didn't work, or how do you screen for personalities?
It's really hard. I wouldn't say that well, if you go to our website, we actually have a blog post called How to Be Staunch, which kind of describes some best practices. And this is, there's lots of little things that you look for. Like, let's say you're trying to schedule an appointment with someone. Are they mindful of the time zone? You know, do they notice, do they say something like, how about 3 o'clock Eastern or 2 p.m. Central? You know, or do they just sort of think in terms of time zones? I mean, that's just a basic skill that a lot of people just don't do that. You know, they just don't think that way. And so we look for that just as part of the scheduling process when we're doing an interview with them to see, do they get that right? Do they show up on time? Are they comfortable with video? Most of our Hangouts are actually not video. Just to save bandwidth, we'll just turn off our cameras. But you can see some people get kind of skeeved out by the video. You know, they're uncomfortable. And you know, that's an indicator that maybe they're not really used to working remotely and not comfortable with that kind of environment. We ask them a lot if they've worked remotely before, what kind of projects they work, what kind of tools they've used for their projects. That can give you an indicator as well. But still, it's hard to tell sometimes. I mean, we're not batting 1,000 when it comes to picking people who, you know, can definitely work well in this environment. There's a little bit of trial and error there.
Well, and I think some people think that maybe they can do it, and then when they actually start to do it in real life, they think, oh, I thought I could do it, but actually, it's not for me.
Right.
And of course, in the interview process, everybody's on their best behavior.
Right.
Hard to tell.
Yeah, it is. It is. You have to kind of suss it out a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Curious. Yeah, I did the same thing with the hiring process. I checked out like what's their bandwidth speed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like what's their remote office look like? How do they behave on video? I think that's a really big thing because yeah, it's true. And I think with a remote team, I use video a lot to connect with people because I like the personal nature and seeing all the gestures. I think that's important. So it's important for me on my team to use video.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's see, we've talked about just about everything. I mean, we've got culture and productivity, the communication, the tools. I guess two last questions. One is, if you were going to give somebody a tip for, say, a business or a person is going to start working remotely, well, what's a tip that you would give? What's some advice from Derek?
Oh, definitely have a schedule. You know, sit down and figure out what hours do you work. And it doesn't have to be the same every day. Maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday is one thing, and Tuesday, Thursday is something else. But figure out your schedule and work sort of backwards and forwards through that. Like, I'm a big believer in getting enough sleep, right? If I don't get 7 to 8 hours a night, I'm not very productive at all. So figure that out in terms of what time do I get up every day? How much time do I need to get going every day? I give myself at least an hour. And then work backwards. Okay, if that means I have to get up at 7 a.m., how much sleep do I need to get the night before? When do I need to go to bed? And even, you know, they found, I sometimes have insomnia, and they found that looking at computer monitors, iPads, you know, active lighting, blue lighting, I think they call it, can affect your sleep. So, you know, for me, I will not look at a computer after about 9 o'clock at night. You know,
wow.
You know, I love to read in bed, and I actually had to go back to, you know, I used to use a Kindle for everything, but can't do that. So I, you know, once it's about 9 o'clock, I put it down. I have magazines I read instead, or you know, just paperback books, and that has really made a difference for me. You know, in terms of,
it's been noticeable then, not using the glowing screen.
Yes. Well, has it been noticeable? I think so. I think it has. Yeah. It's only recently that I really got militant about it. But I feel like, eliminate any risk.
Right.
Because if I don't have enough sleep, I'm just terrible. I'm not very creative. I'm not very focused. And so when I talk about a regimented schedule, I'd say get right down to the nitty-gritty of how much sleep do you need, when are you going to get up, try to get up at the same time every day, even on the weekends, and have that working for you. I would also say, I have a nap every day too. I take about a 20-minute nap in the afternoon. It's really important to me to regulate like how much energy I have at any given time. So that's the number one thing. Have a schedule, stick to it, and then I guess another one is use tools to eliminate distractions. Like I use a plugin for Chrome. What is it called? I always forget the name of it. I'll find out right now.
Yeah, please find out.
Stay focused. Stay focused. And
okay.
What it does is you can set a certain amount of time every day that you allow yourself for doing things like Facebook and Reddit and whatever, and then you can specify what sites to block. What sites sort of fall under their purview, I guess you could say.
Right.
I use Google 100 times a day, so I can't block that. But other sites I block, and so that means I only get about 10 minutes a day to browse those sort of sites. And if I go past that, it basically I can't see them anymore. It blocks them.
Smart.
Yeah.
Really smart, because it's like it's the same story. You go on Facebook, and then an hour later, you're looking at something ridiculous, some article on Entertainment Tonight or whatever that you take.
Yeah. It's really easy to get stuck down that rabbit hole.
Right. Yeah. People build content in order to lure us. That's then they're experts at it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Put up the defenses.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the last question would be, if somebody wants to learn more about you, what's the best way to contact you and to do that?
Two ways. So one, if you want to learn about Staunch Robots, just go to staunchrobotz.com. There we have a blog where I post. I do most of the content there around topics like this. We also do a podcast where we interview different business and tech thought leaders, if you could say. Then I also personally, I have a website, derekscruggs.com, and I actually do my own podcast, which is called Semi-Random Walks, and that's geared more toward just what are the life choices people made, what are the random things that influenced the choices you made. I think a lot of most of what it focuses on now is business, because that's just who I know as business people. But I'm also talking to more creative, artistic types, and I think one of the false narratives we have of sort of eminent people is that they had this nice, smooth rise to success. They did this thing, and that led to this, and that led to this, and that led to this. And I think it's much more like this. Tried this one thing, it didn't work. Or I just randomly met this one person at a conference, and that changed my life. There's so many of those types of interactions that I think play a really key role in people's lives, right? That can determine who you marry. It's just if it weren't for some crazy circumstance of how you met this person, and so that's kind of what I'm trying to surface with that. Is one of my kind of personal mantras, I guess you could say, is to embrace randomness. And I didn't come up with that. I heard that somewhere else. But basically, if there's something new or different to try, then just do it. Because you never know where that'll lead. Going to Columbia, for example, that was definitely a new thing for me. So that's a lot of what I talk about in my podcast, or those kinds of things.
I love that idea. I think anybody that's lived long enough has had exactly what you described, that a few of those random moments where you think, oh my God, life did a 90-degree turn when when X happened. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those are some of the best moments. I'm flooded with my 90-degree memories right now. Oh yeah, totally. Well, thanks. I really appreciate talking with you today. I think there's a lot of great insight here, some really good tips, and I think I have to regulate my schedule more and maybe get a paperback book and put my Kindle away at night.
Yeah. Give it a shot. Yeah,
it's hard. I've got everything in that Kindle. So, all right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate you listening. And until next time, be powerful.